the site of the fire, they're calling her a coward. Can the Prime Minister prove to the protesters in West London her government has listened and learned?
Within 3 weeks, people will be rehoused, so they have a home to go to.
I ask you again, do you accept, though, that you misread the public mood, the level of anger? You didn't go and meet residents, and they really resented that.
This was a terrible tragedy that took place.
Tonight, those demonstrations continue. One group have tried to storm Kensington's Town Hall. Another was outside the BBC and at Downing Street, all demanding answers.
And I walked with the marchers from Kensington Town Hall to the Tower and saw the passion and the anger of people here.
And reality check, it's just 1 week on from voting day. If there was an election next week, God forbid, who would vote for Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah.
Put your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. Interesting, so you've switched now. We asked people in Enfield, which turned Labour, what they think now. Good evening. It was exactly a week ago tonight that Kensington Town Hall was recounting one of the tightest fought battles of the general election. A seat that overturned a huge Conservative majority to go Labour by just 20 votes. Today, it became the centre of protest as locals and residents of the Grenfell Tower fire descended upon it to scream their anger, demanding justice, information and answers from both government and the media. Arrangements for survivors and evacuees in the borough has been shambolic, powered by volunteers with little coordination from authorities. Tonight, as more protests spread to the centre of London, it felt like a bottle had been uncorked. The heat of early summer, the anger of grief, a potentially toxic combination for a government so fragile in its grip on power. John Sweeney has been in the thick of it all day and joins us now. What's the mood like where you are, John?
Well, Emily, the situation here, it's tense. I just walked past a candlelit vigil. Lots of people standing outside the church holding candles to the dead. But at the same time, there are shouts, there's a frenzy, there's a police helicopter up in the sky. It's very, very hard to convey just how angry people were. I went on this march earlier today from Kensington Town Hall to the Tower, and there were times when you could almost feel the anger overflow. This feels, I may be wrong about this, but this feels toxic for the government of Theresa May. It feels as though there's a vacuum with this situation, and what happens when a vacuum is created is that nothing, that people fill in, and it's dark, no question.
Feeling on the march you described earlier, John, do you think that's dissipated now?
No, I feel, I don't want to be overly pessimistic, but I cannot see this ending well. A simple problem is nobody knows how many people have died. I was speaking to somebody who's close to a firefighter, and they were worrying, but actually there could be refugee families from places like Somalia with lots and lots of people in their family. And so the numbers we're talking about, possibly 70 dead, maybe 100 dead, maybe more than that, no one knows. And while this uncertainty happens, and there are all sorts of sensible and good reasons for the authorities to be cautious and go step by step, they've got to get the forensics right, something that's going to be very difficult. But it's fueling anger. It feels as though nothing is being done. And certainly Theresa May didn't help. And I've heard this again and again, that there's difficulty. Right now, you can hear people shouting at us. The BBC is not popular. But today, this evening, I walked with the marchers from Kensington Town Hall. This is my report. Tonight, those who were grieving for the dead of the Grenfell fire took to the streets of London's richest borough.
We outnumber
remember, the Conservative vote is in this area 2 to 1. 2 to 1. Why don't we turn up? Why don't we?
The election result here in Kensington was more finely balanced than that, but the passion is real and raw. So High Street Kent Tube's over there, and we've just turned off Kensington High Street, and we're now on Kensington Church Street. The idea that there would be a big demo, a big angry demo in this part of London a couple of weeks ago, it's extraordinary. As the march turned north towards the Tower, the numbers grew.
The kids go to all of the schools around here, Holland Park.
And so did the anger. Also on the march, this man who lives in the Tower block in South London and fears what happened to the people of Grenfell Tower might happen to him.
And they put new cladding on our block, and we've been unable to find out in the last 3 days if that cladding is safe in our block. People aren't sleeping at night. I've had about 8 hours sleep the last few nights. There's children not sleeping. It's an absolute disgrace.
Motorists hooted their support. Tourists and shoppers looked on, stupefied. These Met vans used their sirens. But for the Main, the police presence was very low-key. So the Tower in the background, the crowd is still pouring fast. And it's hard to express just how angry these people are. There's a real anger. Politics has left Parliament and gone on the streets. As light faded, passion seemed to ease, but London's dark monument remains.
John Sweeney, well, that's how the day ended, but how did we reach this point? The government was keen to get on the front foot early this morning. Sajid Javid, the Community Secretary, promised nothing would be spared in an attempt to get those affected back on their feet. So did it go to plan? Here's David Grossman.
This was the picture that did for George Bush's reputation, flying over the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, avoiding the victims and, it seemed, their plight. Is this the picture that's had a similar impact for Theresa May? Yesterday, meeting not survivors, not the bereaved or the anxious, but the emergency services. Security concerns, we were told.
The flames were just unbelievable.
The fact that today the Queen managed a visit only served to put more pressure on Mrs May. Her Majesty, though, is not the focus of widespread anger right now.
We want answers, that's all we want, answers and justice.
Rightly or wrongly, Theresa May has become just that. Theresa May is joined in the dock of local opinion by Kensington and Chelsea Council.
I think the anger is growing, and I think we have a right to be angry. I think as Londoners we need to come out and say that this is not acceptable. Enough is enough. We need to be angry. There's no reason not to be angry. As the lady said, children have died, families have died.
A protest this afternoon included people storming through the town hall reception and a standoff on the stairs.
What you get here is a strong sense of anger, not simply about what happened in Grenfell Tower, although that is obviously the focus of today's demonstration. It's more about power relationships, who's in charge, and how they treat people who are dependent on them for their lives and their livelihoods.
What we heard today time and time again is that the authorities aren't being honest, that they're holding information back, that they're trying even to minimise the official death toll.
We need to be heard! Nearly 100% missing. People don't know. A lot of people keep asking each other, did you see that person? Did you meet him? Have you heard about him? People are lost, you know what I mean, but they don't know if they are in the hospitals or they are dead or if they are in the building.
The Prime Minister today attempted to answer her critics with a visit to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital to meet survivors. Strong and stable leadership or just stable door locking? Because when that wasn't enough to satisfy her critics, the Prime Minister's team organised another visit. This afternoon to a church near the Tower, now a centre for the relief effort. But this too did little to calm the anger.
And then you're going to come down after people have forced your clerk to be here? Forced there, dragged there by your pearls to Ross. and then you're gonna hide behind that red door. Oh no.
Why go to the same place Jeremy Corbyn went 24 hours before? Because it's all the publicity stunt, and papers like the Telegraph and Daily Mail who supported her are going to show that she has some type of heart and soul. When she really doesn't. It's cold like a fish. It's just ridiculous. And at the end of the day, if you care, show you care. It's very disheartening to the community to not see, where's the housing minister? Where's the Home Secretary? You know, things that happen in Manchester, it's so sad. We need to hear you talk. This is awful. I'm not trying to blame anyone. A lot of people are. I'm just saying, show your care, be around here. Because what's happening is the council haven't shown anything. Where are they? You know, and again, we are going to talk about things that happened and what's going to happen in terms of let's make sure this doesn't happen again. But it's happened now.
The Prime Minister's departure from the church was chaotic and angry. Shouts of murderers and coward. At one point, her car's escape was blocked. The police had to surround it to keep back the crowd. The way was cleared just in time. She may have managed to leave the area, but neither she, nor the government, nor the council are clear of the controversy surrounding this disaster.
David Grossman there, you heard people asking for more communication, and this evening, in a very unusual move and with next to no notice, Downing Street informed us the Prime Minister would be arriving here at the BBC to do an interview. Theresa May was announcing a comprehensive package of support for the victims, including a £5 million fund made available to pay for emergency supplies, food, clothes and other costs. I sat down with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you've come here today to the BBC instead of doing the interview at the site where you just were. Why is that?
Well, what I want to talk about today is what the government is making available to the victims of this absolutely horrendous tragedy. I think we were all, when we saw the horrific scenes of what had happened at Grenfell Tower, we all were deeply affected by that. It's absolutely horrifying. And I've been hearing stories today from people about their experiences. I've also been hearing from the local community about the issues and concerns that they have. Now, the government is making £5 million available for those emergency funds for people who need just to get money to be able to buy the normal things of everyday life. This morning I was in one of the hospitals meeting some of the victims there, and one of the women said to me, basically she ran out of this Grenfell Tower basically with a t-shirt and a pair of knickers. She has nothing. That's why the government is putting that funding in. There are other things we'll do as well to provide support for people to ensure they're rehoused within 3 weeks. But immediately we need to ensure people have the help they need.
There is a need for the public to hear you say in words of one syllable, something terrible has happened, something has gone badly wrong, it is our fault. We acknowledge that and accept responsibility.
This has been, something terrible has happened. This is an absolutely awful fire that took place. People have lost their lives. People have had their homes destroyed. They have fled for their lives with absolutely nothing.
Do you accept that you misread the public mood on this one? You misread the anger that people feel about this. They shouted coward at you this afternoon when you left St Clement's.
What I have done since this incident took place is, first of all, yesterday, ensure that the public services had the support that they needed in order to be able to do the job they were doing in the immediate aftermath of this.
But that's 3 days on, Prime Minister. This is Friday evening. They needed those things in place on Wednesday. There were people we spoke to who were housed for one night, didn't know where they'd spend the next night, had no money to spend on food, and were not told anything by anyone. No one was in charge.
What I have done today is ensured that we are, as a government, putting that funding in place for people in the area. This has been an absolutely terrifying experience.
When did they get that funding? When are they told where they're going to be housed?
It has been a terrifying experience for people. This is why, when I heard stories yesterday from the emergency services about the issues around the fire. That's why I came straight back to Downing Street and I ordered a public inquiry. And we'll make sure that takes place as soon as possible to get to the bottom of this. But this is not just about finding out what happened. This is not just about finding out who was responsible for what happened. It's about ensuring that support is there, here and now.
But why wasn't it there in place? Any other tragedy, flooding, you would have had the army there, you would have had organisers. I was there on the ground, I saw the chaos for myself. There was no one in charge and there was nobody willing to accept responsibility.
We are ensuring that support is put in place for people. Now, that means that money should be made available, and we have to, one of the things I've just heard from people is about making sure that that money actually gets through to people. And that's a very real issue, because we have to, as government, make the money available, but I want to ensure that people actually get that money in their hands so they can go and buy the things that they need.
They're being rehoused outside the borough. They're being rehoused in places they don't know and don't live, don't have friends, don't have family.
We are committed to ensuring that people are rehoused as far as possible within the borough or in neighbouring boroughs. Some people may actually want to go to another part of London where perhaps they have a greater support network, where they have friends and relatives. We are ensuring that within 3 weeks people will be rehoused so they have a home to go to.
I ask
so
you again,
immediate
do you
support.
accept, though, that you misread the public mood, the level of anger? You didn't go and meet residents and they really resented that.
This was a terrible tragedy that took place. People have lost their lives and others have lost everything, all their possessions, their home and everything. What we are doing is putting in place the support that will help them. But it is a terrible tragedy. I have heard horrifying stories from the fire brigade, from the police and from the victims themselves who were in that tower, but also from other local residents, some of whom of course have not been able to go back to their homes either.
And
what I'm now absolutely focused on is ensuring that we get that support on the ground. As I say, government is making money available. We're ensuring that we're going to get to the bottom of what's happened. We will ensure that people are rehoused, but we need to make sure that that actually happens.
This was preventable, wasn't it? In 2013, a coroner had safety recommendations which included putting sprinklers in all these buildings, and it was never done. There were 2 types of material that could have been used in the cladding. One was flammable and one was fireproof, and the fireproof one cost £2 more. Was that not £2 worth spending?
Well, we have yet to find out what the cause of the fire was. The fire brigade, the fire service are doing that.
You could have stopped it spreading by spending £2 more on the cladding.
The fire service are looking at what the cause of the fire was. And it's important that we get to the bottom of this, that we find out exactly what happened.
But you were recommended this in 2013. You were in government there, and a coroner said you can stop this with a sprinkler system in every block.
And the government has taken action on the recommendations of the coroner's report. But what we need to do in relation to this incident, to this horrifying fire, is to make sure that we get to the bottom of why this fire took place, what happened, why did it spread so unexpectedly and so ferociously and so quickly.
But we know that Gavin Barwell sat on a report from last October that he should have looked at. He knew about these recommendations then.
No, the government acted on recommendations from the coroner's report, but what we need to do is ensure that in relation to this fire, we do find out what caused the fire. Now, that will be done. The fire service will make a report. The fire service will look at what it was that immediately happened. But beyond that, the public inquiry will get to the wider issues of responsibility.
Just in terms of reassuring, there are 4,000 other high-rise blocks. There are many, many residents tonight wondering what kind of precautions you're taking. When will you be able to tell them that they are safe when they go to sleep in their beds?
Well, the government is doing everything in its power to ensure that people are safe. We've identified those buildings, and over the weekend, now and over the weekend, people are going in and inspecting those buildings. We will do everything in our power to make sure that people are safe.
Does the culture have to change now? Does it have to be a culture where you start putting health and safety first instead of cutting corners?
What we need to do is to ensure that immediately people have the support that they need in order to deal with what is a horrific and terrible circumstance that people are in. We then also need to look at how this happened, why it happened, and what lessons need to be learnt. And if action needs to be taken, we will take it.
Prime Minister, thank you. And we should say the government says it did act on the coroner's recommendations following the Camberwell Tower fire by writing to social housing landlords, asking them to consider fitting sprinklers to older blocks. It also says it has been consulting on revised building regulations. It will be a while before we know for sure what caused the Grenfell Tower fire and what led it to consume the building with such devastating speed. But already, as you know, questions have been asked about the cladding applied during a recent refurbishment. Newsnight revealed on Wednesday that it contained plastic and was less fire resistant than others available. Our investigations man, Phil Kemp, has been looking at possible weaknesses in the building. Phil, just talk us through what you found.
Well, yesterday we heard from the Fire Protection Association about their concerns about some of the materials that are used in modern construction and the fire risk that they pose. And that's not just the cladding that we revealed on Wednesday night was used in the Grenfell Tower case, this polyethylene core that is less fire resistant than some other types available, but also the kind of plastic insulation, the foamy stuff that sits between the external wall of social housing and this cladding. And there's been a real push in recent years to make these kinds of apartment buildings more energy efficient all over the country. But in doing that, and with the best of intentions, it seems that we may have introduced a new fire risk. Now, interestingly, I spoke to the fire chief of Frankfurt this morning, Professor Reinhard Ries. Frankfurt, obviously a city with lots of high-rise buildings, and he told me that these kinds of combustible products simply could not be used in high-rise buildings in Germany. They haven't been used for years. That's been the case there. It's also the case in Germany that they don't use lots of products that we use here that have a particular fire retardant because of the toxic chemicals that it gives off when it's on fire that are potentially lethal to people. So very different standards, it seems, between what we do here and in Germany.
You've talked about the outside, the cladding, but this also might be something inside, internal to the buildings.
Yeah, I spoke to another expert this morning who was telling me that in a block like Grenfell Tower, all of the front doors of the flats in a building like that have to be fire-safe doors in their own right, and they also have to be self-closing. And the reason for that is that if a fire breaks out in a flat, that will contain the fire and stop it from spreading throughout the block. Now, we know that there's been an issue with some other blocks at the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. That's the organisation that's responsible for Grenfell Tower as well. We know that there's been a problem with these doors in some of the other blocks that they're responsible for. Now, the reason this might be relevant in the Grenfell Tower case is that there was smoke in the stairwells. We've also heard this story of a neighbour saying that she's able to look straight into the flat where apparently a fridge exploded. And the expert that I spoke to said that suggested there might have been a problem with the self-closing door in that case. So what's emerging, I think, now is the possibility that there is a combination of different factors, both internally and externally, that might all be coming together in a kind of perfect storm to lead to this devastating fire.
Phil, thank you very much. Thank you. It is extraordinary, isn't it, to think that this time last week the nation was just trying to get to grips with an election result very few had seen coming. A week on, there is still no official deal between the Conservatives and the DUP, but there are very few Conservatives willing Theresa May to go, so loath are they to contemplate a whole new election. We went to a marginal seat in North London, Enfield Southgate, where many voters abandoned the Conservatives to choose a Labour MP. I was keen to find out what they had been voting for and how they viewed the result we ended up with. David, I'm going to start with you because you voted for the first time this time round. What was it that made you vote? What motivated you to vote? The most important thing for you?
Being 18 now, just 2 weeks after Brexit, I seem to miss that. And a lot of young people my age, me as well, felt kind of cheated out of the future. There was a lot of decisions being made that we had no option to do anything about, and it would affect us more than the older people who got to vote and we didn't. So to vote in this election was very important because it actually, for the first time, seemed like an election with a choice.
And you voted for Corbyn, and that was, for you, a simple choice,
I voted for my local MP, Bambos, and I do also think that Jeremy Corbyn is good as a leader of the Labour Party, yes. So I wanted him to be Prime Minister more than I wanted Theresa May to be Prime Minister.
Mark, I'm going to come to you. What was it that pushed you to vote? Your priorities?
So my priorities in this vote was who's going to be the next leader of this country. And I didn't feel comfortable with the idea of Jeremy Corbyn being the next leader in Downing Street. And the reason for that is because there have been instances of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, and I just don't think that Jeremy Corbyn has done enough to tackle that and to put people from my community's minds at ease. So for me, it was largely about the leader.
I'm not necessarily a Corbyn fan, but what I do think he's a politician with integrity. And I think for the first time, maybe in my voting life, there was a distinction between real socialism and Tory politics. And I felt like in New Labour, they went so right of centre in order to capture the vote. For the first time, there really was a choice about, I'm a socialist, voting for socialist principles, voting for the public sector.
Louise, when you hear people talking about, you know, politician with integrity versus the one that you voted for, Theresa May, or your local MP, what does it say to you?
I personally feel Theresa May does have integrity. She is somebody who I prefer to other Tory politicians. She came from a grammar school background, not a public school. She's not the old boy network. But probably security is on my mind at the moment. I've got 3 daughters growing up in this world. I live in London. I didn't feel comfortable, and where we talked about leader versus party, I didn't feel comfortable with Corbyn as a leader. Theresa May seems to be taking a very strong hand, and that's just one of the reasons. Terror was important to me.
Can I ask who else had terror in their minds, or the response to terror when they voted?
Did, but for a different reason. I think in the Labour's manifesto, talking about putting more into public security in terms of policing, things like that, that is what is going to counter terrorism, not what things like Theresa May did by cutting police, cutting national security. If they had 5-10 warnings about things that happened recently because of cuts.
How many people voted Labour over terror, but for different reasons to security, about public service cuts? Let me just see a show of hands. OK, 3 of you. Madeleine, I want to come to you because you were wavering right up to the moment when you put the cross in the box.
For the first time in quite a few elections, I actually got into the booth, and as you say, I was wavering where to put my cross, Conservative or Labour. I went Conservative because I think we need some continuity. I'm not sure whether it was the right thing to do even now. Labour did get in our constituency, but I was very torn. There's so many important issues. There's the NHS, which is a big thing for me. There's the care of the elderly. I have an elderly mother. There's education, all those issues. There's so many issues, actually, too many to mention.
And can I ask, how many people had Brexit on their mind? Because we were told at the beginning, weren't we, that this was a vote about Brexit. How many people went to the polls thinking about Brexit more than anything else? One.
Not at all for me.
Not at all.
I did think about it, but I actually was really happy with the result, because I actually think the Conservatives need to get on with it. I believe in democracy, so for me, the fact that they don't have a huge majority is going to make it difficult to push through some of the really, right-wing policies. But let them get on with this Brexit, because I want to see how anybody works this out.
Let me just ask you now, with a show of hands, who feels they got the outcome from this election that they wanted?
3/4.
Interesting. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. OK. You're shaking your head, Madeleine. So let me ask then the other way around. Who feels it's a mess where we are?
Yeah.
It's a mess, but you don't mind.
It's an absolute out of mess comes order. Exactly.
It's reflective of how split the country is. It reflects what it is.
John, you said out of chaos sometimes order emerges. Madeleine, that's not your sense of this at all.
It's not, no. I mean, I do feel a bit worried. I'm not a worrying person, really, but I just feel that there's so much going on. There's so many issues that need to be solved, and I wanted, say, continuation of something. I'm not sure whether it's going to happen now, but by voting Tory, I just thought keep it as it is for a while and see what happens, and to let Theresa May go through with the Brexit. She's promised us something. I'm not sure whether she can deliver it, but we'll see.
Do you, as a Conservative, either of you two, feel that you don't trust her as much now because she got this wrong?
I don't not trust her in terms of her character or her integrity. She made some errors of judgment. She took an awful lot for granted and certainly has egg on her face. And that bothers me that she's weakened our position in terms of negotiating Brexit. Because, although, I think we had Juncker saying he doesn't hold, she's obviously laughing stock over in Brussels, but I hope we can get some stability soon in order to be able to tie up the Brexit deal that she's promising us.
Do you resent this, Mark, as a sort of election? Do you feel that she's put you as a Conservative voter in a tricky position?
I just think it was very unnecessary. I know it's easy to say that in hindsight, but at a time when you need complete stability, there was just no need for it at all. I think it was a really bad error of judgment.
Of the ones who voted Conservative, which of you like Theresa May as much or more than you did before the election? Okay.
I feel the same.
The same.
I didn't find her a hugely warm character when she appeared on the One show. It was embarrassing.
So what is the bit then that you warm to? You don't warm to the
her stability, the confidence she gives me in the way that she's going to continue to run the economy.
Let me ask the Labour voters, which of you like Jeremy Corbyn as much or more since you voted or since the election?
Yeah.
I've liked him since I saw him as a local MP in Essington, actually.
Okay, but you like him more. He has grown in stature. So do you think this is just about who won and who lost? Not in actual numbers, but in terms of who's been seen to have a good campaign, who wasn't having a good campaign?
Well, I think this is something that doesn't necessarily just come down to the campaign. And I think I personally support Jeremy Corbyn because this is a process. This is a growth, and what he represents is part of this process. It's a shift from this kind of establishment politics to something which is more for the community, for the bottom, for the people.
Who here thinks Brexit won't actually happen now?
No idea. I think it will. Just a softer version than Theresa wanted.
It's this word that hangs there, Brexit. What does it mean? We don't know what it means yet. When it happens, we will have a list of things that are policies and things that are going to happen. Maybe there should be a vote then. Because if we all turn against it, all of us in this room say, no, that's going to affect my mum, that's going to affect the children, that's going to affect the health service. We can't have that happen to our country.
I think that Britain will be outside the EU paying all the same fees for all the same privileges they had. They will not be part of Europe because they've voted to go out of it. But they're going to have to pay for it because how can you trade? How can you trade in isolation?
Okay, let's have a look at domestic agenda. If there was one issue that really caught hold of you during this election in domestic terms, away from Brexit, what was it?
Austerity.
Cuts, yeah.
Austerity.
Stable economy.
Last question. If there was an election next week, God forbid, who would vote for Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. Interesting. So you've switched now. Yeah. Who would vote for a Conservative other than Theresa May?
Never.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
If I said Boris Johnson, would you put your hand up?
Boris Johnson.
Well, if it was the only choice.
And who would vote for Theresa May?
Vote for him.
I would vote again for Theresa May.
2 of you.
Yeah.
I was voting for Labour policies, not Jeremy Corbyn, but he's the leader. But I think it is about being policy driven. I think that's really important.
Is that the thing we've learnt?
You need someone inspirational to push it forward, but it should be about the ideas first and foremost.
I think it's a shame that we focus on the personalities of the leaders because that's not the thing, is it?
Exactly.
It's what they do, it's not what they say.
It sounds like we should take this on to the pub now. Thank you all very much indeed. Some of the voters of Enfield with me earlier. Well, I'm going to return to Grenfell now. A lot of anger that we've been seeing today has been from friends and relatives who want to know what's happened to their loved ones. The tower is now a burnt-out shell, the site of a criminal investigation, and toxic and structurally unsafe. So how do they even begin to make sense of what actually happened in there on Tuesday night? And how long will it be before forensic teams are able to provide answers as to who lost their lives inside? Lessons can be learnt from the aftermath of the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers. And one of the key forensic pathologists of that catastrophe was Dr. Judy Melinek, who joined me earlier from San Francisco. I asked her what she had learnt then that could be shared with us now.
A thorough investigation is not something that can be done overnight. It takes weeks and even months, and sometimes up to and including years, in order to get to the bottom of what happened. So in the immediate aftermath, first and most importantly, the people who are responding and the supervisors in charge need to make sure that the structure is sufficiently safe and sound so that first responders who are going in there and those who are charged with the recovery of the remains are safe as well. Otherwise, we'll have more tragedies. And the next step would be to collect important information from the families of the deceased about their ways to identify them, either identifying marks and scars, jewelry, tattoos, and then also collect DNA.
And how difficult do you think it will be to collect DNA?
The most important thing is that we don't know at this particular point what the condition of the remains are. There could be a whole discrepancy between people who are intact but just suffered from smoke inhalation compared to people whose bodies are completely charred. In a situation such as this, you can have difficulty because, for example, in 9/11, we could get exemplars from the deceased. So we can get the toothbrush of the person who's missing, or we can get the underwear of the person who's missing and use that to compare them to the person. It's easier to compare self to self than to compare self to next of kin. And so in this particular situation, you've got people who are dead within their residences. All of their personal property basically went up in flames with them. And so it seems that most likely the analyses are going to have to be to next of kin relatives, and that's more difficult.
So am I right in thinking that in the Twin Towers, some 40% of bodies were never identified?
That is correct. The reason for that is because of the forces at play in that particular incident, where you had jet fuel, you had collapse of the buildings, and then you had fires that went on for months. We don't have exactly the same scenario here, so I'm hopeful that DNA analysis will be more fruitful in a case such as this.
This will be devastating news to many of the families, and they will want to know what happens if they don't get that identification.
In the United States, for 9/11 victims who were not identified based on their bodies, there was a legal process put into place, a judicial process, where the person was declared dead and a death certificate was created so that the families could then have closure, close out financial concerns, and move on, even though the body parts had not yet been identified. So there was a delay in that. And then if and when DNA analysis occurred at a later time, those data points were merged with the death certificate that was put together by judicial review. So at least a death certificate allows the family to move on, even when remains are taking longer to identify.
Dr. Melenik, you started by saying the key was communication. Do you think authorities have explained fully enough here just how lengthy and difficult a process this will be?
I think it is important that they set up a command center and that they have public relations staff who are on hand to be able to answer these questions. Typically what happens is we will set up a family center separate from the coroner's office so that the families can go and get resources as well. And in this particular situation, you have people who are in need of housing as well and charity work. So that can all be centralized, and then you can use that family center as a repository for also collecting information about the deceased, the people who are missing, and also exemplars for DNA analysis.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Forensic pathologist there, Dr. Judy Melenik. Before we go, I'll just take you through some of the front pages. The same story, but reported with different leans, as you'll see. The Guardian, Grenfell fury spills onto the streets. Protesters boo PM and march to Downing Street. The Daily Telegraph, however, has militants hijack Inferno protests. Hard left activists accused of exploiting the grief of Grenfell Tower families as demonstrations turn ugly. The Sun has it was murder. Protesters rage at Tower deaths as the crowd marches on Downing Street. And the Daily Mirror has a tale of two leaders, Theresa May in the top photo and the Queen visiting there in the one below. That's all from us at the end of a week and a fortnight that will be remembered in this country for a very long time. From all of us here, good night.
Hello there. It's a dry, settled and sunny story for many of us this weekend. Hardly a cloud in the sky across much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Some sunshine coming through into eastern Scotland. Just the far northwest staying cloudy, dull and damp at times.